Welcome to the Heal Podcast. I'm Kelly Noonan-Gores, and every week I speak to the leading doctors, healers, spiritual teachers, and scientists to find out what is truly possible when it comes to healing. I also interview real people with extraordinary healing stories. My philosophy is, what's possible for one is possible for all. On today's episode of the Heal Podcast, I had the pleasure of chatting with Dr. Uma Naidoo. Besides being a lovely human being, she is a triple threat. She is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, professional chef, and nutrition specialist. Dr. Uma is regarded both nationally and internationally as a medical pioneer in the new field of nutritional psychiatry. Featured in the Wall Street Journal, ABC News, Harvard Health Press, Goop, and many others, Dr. Uma has a special interest on the impact of food on mood and other mental health conditions. In her book, This Is Your Brain on Food, she shows the cutting-edge science demonstrating the ways in which food contributes to our mental health and how a sound diet can help treat and prevent a wide range of psychological and cognitive health issues, from ADHD to anxiety, depression, OCD, and others. In times like these, when we are dealing with the silent pandemic of mental health issues like anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, and much more, this is an extremely important, yet an empowering conversation. Let's dive in. Dr. Uma, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm really happy to be here. So excited for your podcast.
Thank you. So, how did you first come to realize that nutrition was fundamental in your psychiatry practice?
It was actually early on, Kelly. I mean, the roots of trying to eat healthy or being aware of food and our body started as a child because I grew up in a very large South Asian family and lots of cooks in the kitchen, spent a lot of time with my grandmother, to whom my book is dedicated. And so I sort of watched food being prepared, picking vegetables from the garden, preparing the food. And it was also a source of joy and family coming together and nurturance. So I had those elements with which I grew up. But I also grew up around grandparents who taught me to meditate, taught me yoga and things like that. So it was sort of something I came into the world with. But when I started my psychiatry training, as a young trainee, you're somewhat timid when you first learning these things. A patient yelled at me, and he yelled at me because he felt that I had caused him weight gain. And I had his medical chart on the computer in front of me. I knew it wasn't me because I knew his baseline weight. And he also walked in the room with, a large, in Boston, our favorite coffee is Dunkin' Donuts coffee. So it was a large 20 ounce. And I looked at that, caught my eye, but something occurred to me in that moment, which I like to think of as my aha moment, because I looked at it and I said to him, but Bill, let me just ask you about your coffee. And part of it was, being a young resident and training, I wanted to distract him from yelling at me. But at the same time, something was kind of, working in my mind. I said, he looked at it, and we kind of then sat down at the computer and worked out from the processed creamer that he was adding of almost quarter to half a cup in the 20 ounce size, and the number of sugars, which equaled about 8 to 10 teaspoons of sugar. He liked it sweet, that he was consuming so many additional unhealthy calories in that coffee, that if he was having at least 1 to 1.5 a day, that over time, that was adding up and actually causing him the weight gain. So while the medication, yes, one of the side effects could potentially be weight gain, that wasn't the way he had entered my office when we first met. So we understood it. And even though I'm not a big calorie counter, I care much more about the source of food and the quality of the food. He actually understood it. And I saw the light bulb go out for him, when I looked at him, and he sort of said, actually, that makes sense. It's all the stuff and all the junk I'm putting in my coffee. And we really worked from there. But when I understood that you can actually translate nutrition information when people understand it, and they can therefore make a habit change, that was very powerful information. And so I started to continue to ask these questions around nutrition, exercise, lifestyle in my practice until I had the opportunity to open my own clinic. And, the term nutritional psychiatry is a nascent one, but I've been incorporating healthy techniques in a holistic holistic, sort of functional and integrated model in psychiatry for a while. But that was actually where it started in terms of the actual clinical practice.
Amazing. And so much has to do with, microbiome is kind of a catchphrase now, and everybody knows about probiotics all of a sudden. So there's, your book, This Is Your Brain on Food, is a fabulous book for anyone looking for information with mental health in relation to food and minerals and supplements. So talk to us a little bit about the gut-brain connection, because I think a lot of people are aware of it, but you go into it in your book so beautifully. If you could just share with us how deeply connected the gut and the brain are.
Absolutely. So, the microbiome research, the gut-brain connection, has really been burgeoning in the last 2 decades. There are some people who might have gone to medical school, more than a couple of decades ago, and they wouldn't have studied it in the way that the research is now outlining it. And as a patient said to me once, I don't know what you're talking about, you rolled eyes, and she said, these organs are far apart in the body. What do you mean? But it's a great way to segue into helping to understand that even though the gut and brain live far apart in the body, they originate from the same exact cells of the embryo and then divide up and form different organs in different parts of the body. But they, of course, linked because they come from the same origin, but then they are connected anatomically, biochemically, and actually physiologically because of this vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is called a wandering nerve in the body. It's our 10th cranial nerve, and it connects the gut to the brain and the brain to the gut. And I like to call it a two-way superhighway that never sleeps. So it's always acting, allowing for bidirectional flow of chemical messages between these two organs. I think that helps people understand there's this real connection that's happening. And then the other things that are important for us to know is that 70% of the immune system is in the gut. So that becomes important in terms of how we eat to help our immunity along, to strengthen, fortify our immunity. And people also know about selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, like Prozac or Zoloft and many others. But 90 or 95% of those receptors are made and are contained in the gut. So, serotonin is made by some of the cells of the gut, and the receptors are there. So that helps people sort of put these pieces together, that if all of these facts exist, then there has to be, or there could be, this connection between what we eat and how we feel. And then, we talk about, and as I go through the book, how it's broken down, and it's really that you want to form those positive substances that really nurture your gut microbiome and help your mental health as well as your physical health.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about, foods that are bad for different mental health disorders. And the theme that comes up every single time, there's certain ways of eating that kind of can be beneficial, whether it's bipolar or OCD or depression, anxiety. And you go into detail in the book, but generally speaking, almost in every chapter, you discuss how the negative effects of the Western diet or the standard American diet. Can you talk a little bit about that, just so people are aware of how bad our Western diet is?
I know. So the standard American diet, or what was also called the Western diet, it's the food that most people in the U.S. consume, or aspects of the food that they consume. Maybe they don't eat every single one of them, but they eat largely, a highly processed diet, a lot of junk foods, fast foods, added foods with a ton of added sugar, sodas, artificial sweeteners, a ton of processed vegetable oils, which are found in fast food restaurants because it's a cheaper, less expensive oil. So it's used for frying and things like that. And there's a recent study in the in a nutrition journal that outlined how foods are engineered to be hyper palatable, but that also makes them somewhat addictive. And we keep wanting to get more, or we want to upsize the French fries. And then when we do upsize, we want to finish the whole bag of French fries. So there's a way in which the food is engineered, and it's not helping us. So the only thing that I think we can do is educate ourselves about how better to eat. How can we improve along this continuum? No one can change an entire way that they're eating overnight, but I would argue that you can start to make small and steady changes along continuum that is improving. So, maybe you're eating a ton of fast foods. Maybe, you start to prepare some small meals at home that you can easily do. Or you give up those fast foods and buy a healthier option, like a salad that is full of leafy greens and colorful vegetables, and that you start to include healthy fats like olive oil or of avocado, and start to give up the packaged processed foods or the fast foods. Even one step like that can start to help someone heal their what I like to call their mental fitness.
Yes, and I love the way you put forth the information, because I didn't feel overwhelmed, or I didn't feel like I had to make drastic changes. I mean, you even talk about the
Great.
benefits
Thank you.
of coffee. We can have,
Yeah, yeah,
depending on what someone is dealing with, as long as
yeah,
it's under 400 milligrams a day, coffee can actually be
yeah,
beneficial. So
absolutely.
it's refreshing to know that you don't have to be crazy. And you talk about actually how, and I didn't make this correlation before I read your book, but I think it's very interesting how OCD, people with eating disorders, that's just a version of OCD in a way, right?
So I'll explain that a little bit more. You're not wrong about it. Technically, in DSM-5, which is what psychiatrists are expected to use, but does miss some elements, like people who have a little bit of anxiety and OCD or depression and ADHD. There are lots of people who fall within different symptom groups. But what it really is, Kelly, is that there are some individuals who are so fixated on healthy eating, and it's really an emerging condition that I'm sure, as the newer version of DSM-5, whichever the next version will be, rolls out, I'm sure it's going to be included in that, because to me, it's really almost a version of an eating problem, because they become so fixated on a few healthy habits that that's all they focus on. But they might actually be missing out super healthy ingredients and nutrients they should be eating. And it really can be challenging to work with individuals. In fact, the treatment failures I've had are usually individuals who have what I call orthorexia. And it, in my opinion, is really, like you said, a version of an eating problem. And I think it's hard because they get fixated on, and they don't want to change that steady habit that they have. It becomes hard to then move them to eating more vegetables, because actually those contain fiber which nurture your gut. Maybe you can pick vegetables that you like, but they might tend to exclude even certain food groups, which don't help them. So it's complicated. Nutrition, food and people can be very complicated. And I think the diet wars in the US don't make it easier, because individuals think that in certain foods are demonized, and they feel, well, I can't eat that. But I look at it through the lens of mental health, and I look at the research around how, say, coffee can impact someone. Now, someone is anxious and they drink a cup of coffee and they get jittery. They might have to switch to decaf or a tea. But for a lot of other people, coffee can be beneficial. So it always depends on that close understanding of how the person is responding. And same thing for foods that are related to OCD and others.
Yes, exactly. Bio individual. So
Exactly. Absolutely. And practicing personalized nutritional psychiatry, which, believe it or not, I now am doing compared to many years ago when I started my clinic. And part of that is really related to understanding the gut microbiome.
exactly, because the bacteria actually, it's so fascinating, all the studies that you talk about where, when you balance your gut bacteria, or they test the gut bacteria of someone with bipolar or schizophrenia,
Mhm.
that they're actually missing certain bacteria that healthy individuals have. So it really does, if you get
That's right.
down to it, the microbiota
Right.
is the key.
Is largely, I think the certainly it is now on the forefront of a lot of the research that's going on, but it's so key in us understanding those simple things that we can start to do. And one of the easiest things is at the end of our fork. It's how we can start to eat differently, because we know from research that the gut bacteria are going to respond within 24 hours of what we eat. You won't feel it immediately, but we know that they start to respond, they start to change, they start to evolve. And you can, like I say to people, you can go to the fast food restaurant, or you can choose a healthier choice. And those bacteria are going to respond, and you will see it down the road. You'll see it in a few weeks, or depending on the unique microbiome, which I like to say, our microbiome is like a thumbprint. Someone might experience it sooner, but those changes start to come into effect with every single meal.
Yeah. And I love the micro and macro of how the microbiome of our soils has changed because we overuse
Yes.
pesticides and chemicals in our water and everything else. So, that's affecting the nutritional content of our food, even if you're, eating organic farmed
And
food.
you're trying, exactly.
So,
Right, because of the absorption, there's a problem with some of the absorption of those nutrients from the soil because the soil has been changed by chemicals. But also, the microbiome exists in other parts of the body, the skin microbiome, the oral microbiome. There are these different, we're understanding this so differently, and for different specialties or different doctors with the different purpose. There's all of this work going on, and I think it's about us putting it together and helping us understand the importance of the gut, and definitely one of the things that affects the gut is how we eat.
yeah. And I love that we are, not human cells. We are in community with these bacteria and
Bacterial
viruses
cells.
and everything. We are in community. And, we're living in a time in history where a lot of people have become isolated. I'm sure you in your practice are seeing more depression and anxiety than ever.
Yes.
I think when you look at cancer, sometimes they say that, the cancer cells have gone rogue, they're isolated, and they create their own, so can you talk to me about the correlation that you've seen recently between isolation and depression and anxiety, or just general disease?
Absolutely. One of the things that I feel is that some of the wording and the messaging around the pandemic could have been changed. For example, it really is physical distancing, and we can still remain socially connected, because people who say are living alone or have to be separated from family members should still try to be on Zoom, Skype, whatever means they can to be socially connected to their loved ones. But what I've seen is, we know that we're human and we're social creatures. So it is very hard when people are isolated and just cut off from the world. There's been a significant increase in teen suicide. 11% of Americans, as a CDC statistic that was released in summer last year, 11% of Americans thought about suicide, which is a huge number. And which, prompted me to, when I had the opportunity, I'm going to be working closely with the Never Alone Foundation at the Chopra Foundation, because they actually are talking about mental health and suicide prevention. Because I know that if 11% of people are thinking about it, how do we know who is going to act in it? Even as a trained psychiatrist, you just don't know. So the best we can do is try to educate people, try to embrace them, try to often. Some of that, Kelly, stems with that loneliness, that isolation, that, if they were with their friends or someone might notice, but if they're just getting onto a Zoom call every day and they're sitting on Zoom, as many of us might be from morning till evening, there's maybe work connection or meetings that they're going to, but there's isolation the rest of the time. And so there's been a huge uptick in depression, anxiety, alcohol and drug abuse. And people are not only just bored, or they're stressed, they're looking for something to make them feel better. There's also unfortunately been an increase, besides mood disorders, problems with sleep. People are even calling it coronasomnia. And unusual things that have come up. There's a condition that people are describing called Zoom dysmorphia, where people get on and they see themselves in a Zoom meeting. They don't like the way their nose looks or part of their face looks, and they actually seeking help from plastic surgeons to get these things corrected. So there's a lot of stuff that is just, still coming out as we understand the emotional impact of the pandemic. So I really think that the silent pandemic is the mental struggles that people are having, whether diagnosed or not.
Yeah. It's been a tough year, challenging everyone in some way, shape, or form. So you've recently had your own healing journey, and I'm sure that I'd like to talk, tell us about the diagnosis that you recently received and how it's kind of, what it's taught you, because I'm sure just in our line of work, if we
Yeah,
present with some sort of illness, we want to go deeper and find out why or what the root cause is. So I'd
absolutely.
love to hear the insights, and I'd love to hear
Absolutely.
about your journey.
Absolutely. So this happened some time ago, but so I'm into more of the healing, thank goodness. But what I will say is that it was very unexpected, and it was unexpected because I was feeling healthy and was actually on vacation with my husband in your part of the world, Kelly. I was in Los Angeles and Beverly Hills, and relaxing and having a nice time away, and fortuitously, by chance, because of how I was holding the book I was reading, um, I discovered a lump in my breast, and it was unexpected because I hadn't noticed it, before. So it troubled me, and I at that moment knew, sort of intuitively, that it was malignant. But I also intuitively knew that I would be okay. I just didn't know at that moment what the journey would be. And I think that, as much as it sounds strange to say this, I am so glad that I had that journey. I wouldn't wish it upon someone else, but I learned so much from the experience of the pain, the worry, the angst, the fear of medications, because I knew the side effects, and that was more troubling to me. I also it was so unexpected because I was kind of walking through life feeling fine, but it also taught me the power of food. And that was quite unexpected because I was practicing. I'd opened my clinic, I was working and doing all of this stuff. And I thought I was eating okay. That's why I always feel we can always up our game, we can always improve ourselves. But, the morning of my first treatment, and the other thing I should say is that, when you're blessed by having access to great medical care, things can sometimes move faster than your mind can absorb them.
Mm.
So my body was going through, within 7 days, including a weekend, several tests, all sorts of imaging, all sorts of things. And I was in treatment before I could, before like an eye blink, so to speak. It was so fast. And my mind was still in shock. It was still in shock of everything that my body was going through and the diagnosis itself. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And on the first chemotherapy treatment that morning, I was super anxious. And I'm fortunate in that, in general in life, I'm not an anxious person. And I was standing in the kitchen making my turmeric latte that I really used to make the chai tea with my grandmother, and always add the turmeric milk to it. And I was making that, and the kettle was boiling, and there's something. I was sitting there really worried and not myself, going through all the side effects in my head, wondering things like, will they get the IV in? What will it be like? Will I have side effects? And as the kettle boiled and it switched off, in that moment, something kind of, the light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, I'm standing here, and I talk to people every single day about how they can eat for their better emotional being, and why am I not doing this? I know that I'm making this turmeric drink for myself, and I know it's going to help me, but why don't I just fortify everything that I'm doing through how I'm eating? And the amazing thing is that I really leaned into using nutritional psychiatry, not only just on a personal level, but beyond that, because of what I was facing. And it taught me an immense amount, to the extent that my doctors would check with me every week and say, so what did you bring for lunch? And which smoothie are you having today? And which fruit are you eating? Because I was blessed not to have suffered as many side effects, almost none. And so it was very meaningful to me on multiple levels. There's certain things that food can't prevent. When you take chemotherapy medications, you lose your hair, you lose things like that. So those things couldn't change. But I think it taught me so much, because I learned to appreciate things so much more. I learned to never take things for granted, even if it's a simple dinner with your husband, and where you're not wearing a wig. That became extremely important to me, because when you you and your spouse go through that, it's painful for them too, right? Because you lose your hair and you look different, and you don't want to be walking around the house all day long with your wig on, and it's just a reminder constantly of what's going on. So there are times like that I really learned from, and I feel like it helped me grow, and it helped me understand the depth and the power of food quite unexpectedly. Because like you can know something intellectually, but when you actually live it and you see the effect, and your doctors are asking you what are you doing different, it becomes much more alive. And so, I feel fortunate to have had that happen, as difficult as it was going through it. And you find your way forward. And that's one of the things I loved about the work that you do, and your documentary. So
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
cool.
And if you don't have an answer for this, it's not meant to pry. I'm just so fascinated
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
have such an extensive background. And is there any insight as to, because you are so knowledgeable, is there any insight as to how cancer developed in your bodies? Do you have any insight? Was it
Yeah.
life path? Was
Yeah.
it to strengthen your
Yeah.
experience and ability to help others? Or
I think that I think the meaning was to help me pause, because there was a way in which um, my life was so busy, and I had the success of this clinic that I'd founded over years, and I was working hard and building it. But sometimes when you get that busy, you lose sight of the things right in front of you. Like, I was probably making that my favorite drink that I made with my grandmother every day, but maybe not sipping it, but checking my phone, checking my email, watching the news. But it really made me pause, because I had to cut back on certain things I did at work. I gave up going on call. It really made lifestyle changes to help heal myself. And it was, I think, the forced pause that you might have to work, but you also have to go get your treatment, and you also have to account for the fact that the day after you may not feel well, and you have to sort of rework how you're doing things. And I think that's very powerful for me, because I think I needed it. I think that without knowing it, I was working hard and challenging myself in a good way. But I was probably stressing myself in a way that was above the level of stress I should have been experiencing. And when you do that, you don't meditate as frequently, or you forget, the gratitude. So your affirmations that you usually write, or usually however you collect them, or that these things have been part of my practice that I think faded or were less frequent because of my drive, and the work that I was doing. And sometimes you forget to put yourself in the picture. And I think that to some extent, that caused me to pause and say, now it's me. What do I do? And I think that was a very big lesson.
so profound, and that resonates with me a lot, because I find myself doing, and I think a lot of people, and especially in California and New York, and it's everywhere really now. There's just so much information, there's so much opportunity, and so people feel like this pressure to do
Yes.
and accomplish and achieve,
and to be at a pace.
Yes, and it's not sustainable. And so thank you for sharing that, because I think that'll resonate with a lot of people, how important it is for us to slow down, really find the balance, take care of ourselves, play more, and so thank you. Yeah, for sharing that. So how do you maintain the balance now that you're kind of in your healing, which is wonderful? What are some of your daily practices or new ways of being to kind of make sure that you stay in gratitude and maintain that balance?
I think that some of what began when I was in active treatment were putting back into place those practices, almost in a way that they began to be built in again. And I find that I find myself feeling different if I forget to do something, if I forget my meditation because I've jumped out of bed and I have to get on a call because it's, with the publisher overseas or whatever it is, um, I realize that I don't feel the same. If I eat differently, or I've gone to a restaurant, I've eaten something that, is not typical for what I eat, and I feel different. Have really started to pay attention to that. So what I find is that during the pandemic, I've had a lot of grace with myself. I've tried to remember that I can only do what I can do, and but I can also use it as a time to reset. So I started to put back, keeping my notebook at my bedside, and getting up and listening to the meditations that I like. And if I don't have time for 20 or half an hour meditation, I do 5 minutes, but I split it up during the day. I take breaks, sort of just thinking breaks during the day. If I just want to clear my mind, I've learned to just force myself into, because especially in this COVID world, force myself into outdoor time much more often, even if it's small bits during the day or a walk in the evening. So connecting back to nature, spending that outdoor time, which I know gives me, 10 minutes in the sunlight gives me the vitamin D I need for the day, better than a supplement, even though the Northeast, many of us need supplements like that. But, little things that just I've begun to do that perhaps um, I had sort of forgotten or put aside as being important. And I just brought them back, and I do it in a way that works for my life. I think that balance is sometimes hard for me because there's so much going on. And literally on a given day, I'm shifting from one podcast to a media interview to clinical work on different platforms each time. And that can be stressful in itself. So, just finding a way to get up and stretch, do a mini meditation, do a breathing exercise, have that calming cup of tea in the middle of the day, or have a cup of green tea to help my focus at a certain point of the day. All of those, it's not just one habit, but it's all of these things sort of combined. And they're almost like a walking checklist that I keep in my head. And if I'm feeling a certain way, I'm like, well, that's what I need to do because I've learned that now the hard way. And that way it becomes easier. So, and some days are not perfect at all. Some days I'm completely off target. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, tomorrow I'll do it better. By tonight, I'll fit in that 5 minutes of meditation. Just it doesn't always work. And when we're working at this pace, finding that balance can be very hard. So
Yes,
I think sometimes each day is different, right? So
that's exactly right. There's different energies happening. There's different stuff
yes,
that life is throwing at you. I have those days where I'm like, well, I will do better tomorrow. But I think it's so important to have tools, and then so that you can just have those tools to turn to so that you can take a pause, so that life doesn't have to hit you over the head with a massive pause in the form of a broken bone or a diagnosis or a layoff or something. If you can find those moments to pause or connect with nature, or just turn within for 5 minutes, those are tools that help you kind of maintain that balance. So you don't have to be whacked with a big pause, a forced pause.
Exactly. Right. And be blown over, which can be a lot more dramatic and actually at times painful, emotionally painful. So
Totally.
I couldn't agree with you more.
And I think you said something so fascinating in your book, and I have it underlined. And it was to the effect of, if you don't have the proper nutrition, if your gut bacteria is thrown off, if you are unhealthy in that way, it's very difficult to make those good decisions. So I really, it's the mental health aspect of food is, how food is fundamental is so important to know, because someone could look at my Instagram and they're like, oh, she's meditating, she's so spiritual, she's so healthy, whatever. But if I wasn't it starts with the food. It starts with the health of your gut brain connection. And then you have the capacity to be aware and not just be in the spin cycle of life. So talk to me a little bit more about that, because it's so profound.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I think you're absolutely right, because I think it's true. A person might look at you do on Instagram or what I do and think, oh, make assumptions, I guess. And that's why I really share with people that it's not necessarily easy for any one of us. I have, for example, I have struggled with my metabolism changing after chemotherapy, and the exercises that I do just don't work as well. So I've had to really rethink that, and I'm still in the process of doing that. And that when your body changes on a mitochondrial level, it's harder. It's sometimes harder to lose those excess pounds. So I will, say to people very honestly, it's not easy for any one of us, and I include myself as part of that. But I also say to them, my patients, that I have grace with myself. If something is not working, I'm going to try something else. But I think that it also comes back to the meaning that you have, and how to sort of move yourself forward, because it does in fact come down to how we're eating. Many of those things come down, and right now one of the most crucial things is our metabolic health. 88% of Americans have at least one abnormal metabolic factor. So now that we know that, even people who don't appear overweight might have a metabolic problem that they don't realize. So there's these different things that are going on with all of us, and I feel like if we don't stop and take notice, we are going to end up with diagnoses that we really don't want. And I think that eating is a simple way that, whether you do intermittent fasting and say you have 2 meals a day, or say you eat regularly, 3 meals a day and snacks, whatever it is that you do, you have that within your power. You can make a choice, you can work with a practitioner, you can figure out your best path forward. You don't have to change everything at one time. It could be just keeping hydrated. It could be making sure you have your coffee early in the day so it doesn't disrupt your sleep. It could be that you cut back on a glass of wine, because if you're relying on that glass of red wine to put you to sleep, it's actually destroying your sleep architecture. So it's all these things that we just need to pay attention to. It's almost bringing it to awareness, and until we bring it to awareness, we don't we don't we don't do it on a regular basis, right? Because it's practice. Whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation, it's practice. And same thing with food. It doesn't change overnight. It's a slow and steady journey. And if you start to make those changes, and you are taking care of your microbes, if you're taking care of your gut microbiome by how you're eating, that healing will start to happen. And people will come back or call me up a week later and say, I noticed a difference. I'm feeling different. I'm thinking more clearly in my meetings, or whatever it is. And that's the power of seeing the changes. And those are the things we have to harness to follow a path of healing.
And do you, as a psychiatrist, so many people are told that, oh, this is a chronic condition and you need to be on an antidepressant, or you need to be on some sort of medication for the rest of their life. I know with severe mental disorders, like say perhaps bipolar or schizophrenia, maybe medication is going to need to be a chronic or like a forever thing. But is it often where you might put someone on an SSRI for a temporary basis or something for OCD while you're healing their gut through nutritional supplementation and diet and lifestyle change, in order to get them off?
Sure.
Talk to me about that, because I feel like that should be the goal. There's going to be a small percentage of people that have a genetic fully penetrant condition that are going to need medical pharmaceutical support for the rest of their life. But I believe that we can achieve through lifestyle change and diet a lot, so that if you need medication, it's for a temporary, short bridge period of time. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, different people vary, and different conditions vary. So you're absolutely right. What I've seen and how I work is that some individuals come in under medication, and over time, we can work to lower the doses of medications. And some people are able to tolerate, but it's a careful evaluation, because what I don't want people to take away from this is eat asparagus and don't take your Prozac, right? That's not the right message. But can you work with a practitioner to slowly cut back while you're upping everything else in terms of your nutrition game, exercise, lifestyle changes, improving your sleep, spending time in nature, meditating, whatever works for you, put it together. It's really a holistic model that's integrated and functional. So as many of those things that you're targeting, you will be able to work with a practitioner maybe to lower your medications. There are other individuals who can't lower their medications, but they can offset side effects just by eating healthier and involving them, so they may not gain as much weight just by keeping active and eating healthy. And so it's sort of almost a careful calibration for each person. And other individuals come in and they are able to function, Kelly. So they're working, they're doing what they need to do, but they're feeling, say, super anxious. And they can actually tolerate working on just a nutritional psychiatry plan because they're not in any danger. They're not unsafe. There's no suicidal ideation. They don't have symptoms of mania or psychosis, which are dangerous. And those conditions need immediate evaluation and often immediate treatment of some kind. But there are individuals who might be super anxious or feeling a little blue. We just heading into spring now. It's been many months of darkness in the Northeast. Shorter hours. People have some seasonal blues, seasonal affective disorder. So they might be able to work with, say, a light therapy lamp, work on their nutrition, do some meditation, do some exercise, and work on a sort of comprehensive plan and stay off medication. So each person does vary, but you're absolutely right. The more serious conditions, we may have less leeway to really have someone come off medications. But when it comes to lifestyle, of which nutrition is one of the leading modalities, these are powerful tools. And I think that lifestyle medicine doctors, functional medicine doctors are really putting forth, you can eat better, you can do this better, you can eat better to change, change your prediabetes, to change your insulin resistance. It's becoming much more powerful now.
Yeah, and it could be as simple as like a magnesium deficiency. So many
That's
people
right.
in the West are deficient in magnesium, vitamin D, omega-3s. I mean, it's fascinating that you
There's
could.
so many things. Yeah.
So
And you could eat differently to help that.
Exactly. So I mean, are there a lot of nutritional psychiatrists out there? What would your advice be for someone who's feeling depressed? Maybe it's associated to a loss or a grief or trauma. Maybe it's something that came out of the blue, hormonal, whatever. Where should someone go to find someone like you? And if someone is quick to, I just want to give people agency. A lot of people go to a doctor, say they're depressed, and they're just handed a
pill, right?
Handed a pill without any knowledge of what's going on in their blood panels. So what would you guide people to seek out first if they're feeling, a mental health disorder?
Absolutely. Well, it's important to be evaluated by an appropriate clinician in the mental health field. And I think that before you, depending on how poorly you're feeling or how the level of your stress might be, to include and be empowered and advocate for yourself for a conversation around, can I work with supplements? Can I speak to a functional medicine doctor who might be able to look at this differently? Nutritional psychiatry is new and nascent. Many of us have practiced this way for a while, but there are fewer people who are using this every day. But one of my great dreams in life is actually to be able to offer more education to different kinds of practitioners, Kelly, that, can learn these tools and employ that, whether they're a health coach or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or even an internal medicine doctor, so that they can include this in their practice, because I feel it's so fundamental. So that's really a big dream of mine to be able to do, because I think that if we set up education for individuals to learn a certification or have this training, then this becomes part of the conversation. You don't have to seek out something. I do believe that my clinic is the only one in the US at Mass General, and it's one in a very large country. So there are people who've studied this overseas. There are groups who've done research, but it's about putting together the clinical and the sort of the clinical as well as the research. And I think that that's where education becomes important. But start the conversation with your practitioner and advocate for yourself. Before you accept a medication, ask for other tools, ask for other evaluations, ask for blood tests. These are things that people should feel empowered to do.
And do you see a shift, because you're closely connected to Harvard, do you see a shift towards teaching in medical schools more about nutrition as a fundamental, foundation for
some
health?
some medical schools are better than others. So I think that I'm hoping over time that will be different in the country. But I think that where I've looked at this for long and hard for a while, and I think that if medical schools don't change anytime soon, then it's up to us to help practitioners of all kinds learn these tools that they can use in their practices every day. Because I think that there's so many types of clinicians out there who can use nutritional psychiatry measures. Psychiatry implies that you're a medical doctor and you've gone through the specialty training. But really what I'm talking about is nutrition and mental health. So I think there's a more global way to help people by offering education and offering ways that they can practice it. Because unfortunately, Kelly, I'd love to say that medical schools, some are doing better than others, but we're still behind the eight ball on that.
Yeah. And, self-awareness, I think, is a huge tool that just we forget about sometimes. I started learning about nutrition and, I consider myself a bright, person, but until I got to some basic education about how what we put in our mouths affects our body and our systems and our symptoms. Once I had that, I started to pay attention to how I felt after I would eat something. And that's, one of the just initial things. Most of us are moving so fast. We're just inhaling our food and moving on, and nobody's really aware of how that's affecting our mood. So I really just encourage everybody to start there. I mean, definitely start with your book.
Yes.
This is your brain on food, because it's eye-opening and it gets into the specifics of such common mental health issues like ADHD, anxiety, depression, bipolar, OCD, libido issues. It really covers so much. But just to start practicing awareness, I mean, I started, when you eat something, your nose starts running and people just don't connect the two.
Know that.
And that's
they ignore it and move on. Yeah.
Exactly. Or if I eat processed sugar, if I eat too much, like a birthday cake or dessert after drinking wine as well, I get edgy, I get irritable. So it starts with your body is constantly telling you what it needs, to pay attention to these symptoms and emotions and feelings in your body and your gut after you eat stuff. That's the first sign. And then to seek out help with someone like you.
I think that's what you said is brilliant, because I talk about what I call body intelligence, which is exactly what you're saying, which is paying attention to that feeling when your body is telling you, my nose is running, or, I have brain fog after this meal, or what, let's connect it back to what we ate and start there, and then seek out what you need from there. And I will actually use that word body intelligence with people, but really what it is, Kelly, it's awareness. It's having self-awareness of what's going on. So that was very well said.
Thank you. You say in your book, I think you thank your mother for the best piece of advice you've ever received. Can you do us the honor and share with us what that advice was?
So this is a funny story, Kelly. My mom is a double boarded physician, right? So remember, I skipped preschool because I wanted to hang out with grandma, but that was because mom during the day was studying. So she ended up being my husband's professor, and he and I hadn't met. And of course, I never got to have my mom as a professor because she was my mom. So I never got to go to her tutorials. I was placed in other groups at medical school. And so one day she comes home and she says, I can't even remember who I was dating or what I was doing, but it was, it was in younger times. And she said, have you met, this young man in my tutorial group, blah, blah, blah. And so she alerted me that, there was some sort of intuition she had that he and I would be a good match. And, this wasn't an arranged marriage or anything like that. She just literally came home one day and said, "You really should meet this young man. He's such a fine gentleman." She said something, very old school, like, "She's such a fine gentleman," or something. "And he's so smart." And I said, "Oh, Mom, I hate it when you try to tell me what to do," kind of thing. And I moved on, but it obviously stuck in my head. And, month or so later, we somehow met up. It was a big school. And really that was how we met. And she was right. We are still best friends. And I think that, and they're also really great friends because they have longer conversations sometimes than she and I do, because they've known each other for years, and she was his professor. So, I always thank her for that, because I could have, like you were talking about, gone through without that awareness and have missed that opportunity to meet someone whom I feel blessed to have. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And
Thank you.
so on that same note, for anyone, I mean, there's this time in history, what piece of advice could you give our listeners who are just struggling and trying to find answers and are feeling out of sorts? And you mentioned a lot about grace in this podcast, which I loved.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to implement that in my life as well. What advice would you like to leave the listener?
I think it's about small things, and by that I mean it could be a small change you make to your daily habit. It could be something small like writing down some gratitudes, or getting up and doing even a 5-minute meditation, or 5 minutes outdoors. If you can start to think about it and chunk it down into something smaller, it will feel more achievable. And you will feel success if you do the 5 minutes of meditation. If you change one habit in terms of how you're eating today, maybe it's just including turmeric and a pinch of black pepper in your food. Maybe it's adding hydration because you're not drinking enough water. You're sitting on Zoom calls, or whatever it is that might be. I think starting that way, you have a much higher level, a much higher, greater opportunity to succeed, because you are giving yourself a chance. You are trying something that you can achieve, and you're not overwhelming yourself with 10 recommendations that someone has asked you to make. And, my book is all about more foods that you can enjoy than you have to avoid. It's really about bringing back more that we can do than eliminate and give away, because just those feelings psychologically don't make us feel good. And if I said, "Here, do these 10 things today," a person is life is hard enough right now. It's challenging enough. And I'm not looking at this in a negative way. All I'm saying is we are challenged. Let's understand that we are. Let's be aware of that and see what we can do in small incremental ways to fill out our lives in a more beautiful way that will give us joy. That will give us joy.
Thank you. Yes. And your book certainly does that. It doesn't feel overwhelming or restrictive. It feels like a gentle nudge in the right direction. And what I love is, you bring up so many just foods that are found in nature, whether it's microgreens or walnuts or, broccoli or leafy greens, all of these suggestions, turmeric and black pepper. These are foods found in nature. And I think it's so fascinating because we as a society are getting cut off from nature more and more. We're going away from nature's natural rhythms, and we're, expressing more disease and dis-ease. So just connecting whole foods and spices and minerals that are found in nature really connects us back to nature, and our body thrives on it.
It really does. And it grounds us. There's a way in which it really is grounding for our bodies as well. And makes us be more aligned with something natural that I think is easier for us, in some ways easier for us to accomplish.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today and sharing all of your wisdom and your personal stories. And I'm really honored that you're here.
I always love talking to you, Kelly. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited.
Thank you for listening to the Heal Podcast. Be sure to tune in for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. Oh, and make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. And if you feel inspired, we would love you to rate and review us so that we have the opportunity to reach more people. And of course, you can follow us on Instagram for some behind-the-scenes fun and more inspiration at @HealDocumentary and @KellyGorris. Thank you so much and be well.